I call to order the meeting of the Joshua Basin Water District for Wednesday, October 4th. And please rise. And Al, do you want to lead us in the pledge?
Yes. Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready to begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Determination of quorum.
All directors are present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to do that.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? It's unanimous. Public comment. This is the time set aside for public comment on any district-related matter not appearing on the agenda. Government code prohibits the board from taking action on these items, but they may be referred for future consideration. Please state your name and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Mr. Marquez.
Hello, Marquez, Sunfair Community. I'll make it brief. I wanted to make a comment about well 14 not coming online yet after 18, 19 months and almost $400,000 plus on expenditures for that well. But I'll wait till after this well comes online, if it does ever come online, and make a longer statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we will move to item number 6, consent calendar. Matters on the consent calendar are considered routine in nature and will be enacted in a single motion without discussion. Any board member or member of the public may request that an item be removed excuse me, from the consent calendar and acted on separately. So do I have a motion to approve this consent calendar?
I move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And the 2 items were the draft minutes of the September 12th meeting and the check registers, which the Finance Committee looked at. Okay. Item number 7, annual capacity fee reports. Review capacity fee reports and recommend the board accept and file.
Capacity fees are one-time charges that fund capital improvements as customers buy into our system, purchase water meters. This pays for infrastructure necessary for the expansion future, either past expansion where they have been able to just jump in and the infrastructure is already there, or they're paying for future construction of that kind of infrastructure. So this is their pro rata share of that system. Capacity fees are legally restricted and can only be used for projects related to growth. Now we can divide a project, such as we did with our H-zone project, and actually more of the H-zone project was on undeveloped land than on developed land. So we used some of our capacity fee funds to construct the H-zone project. Okay. Detailed reports about that were included in your packet. They were reviewed by the Finance Committee and accepted at the 9/25 meeting. We talk about the amount of money in the capacity fee funds through the quarterly report. So you see that on a periodic basis. But this is an annual requirement to talk about the source of the money and what projects we constructed with the money, and so we'll go through the report. 2016-17, page 23 of your report. We talk about the water capacity, because remember we have both water and sewer capacity. This is the page about the water capacity fees. So we began the year with $76,712 roughly, and we added another $56,000 roughly, representing 14 new water meters. This is the most number of water meters that have been purchased in a year since during the last 8 years, and this is the same as the last 3 years combined. So it would appear, and I think Keith can attest to it, that development is picking up, and this is absolutely a demonstration of that. So we added another, as I said, $56,000 roughly to the fund. We earned about $642 in interest, and interest earned on this also has to go back into the fund. Okay, that's required by law. We made no public improvements from this money, so that's what I was talking about earlier, the H zone as an example. We might have done some sort of project, either in total or in part, that relates to growth, to growing and expanding the system, but we didn't, and so we ended up the year with $133,291. So on to the next page, we talk about the sewer capacity fees, wastewater. So we began the year with $525,577 roughly. We added 78,000 and change for High Desert Medical Center. Remember when they built their wastewater plant out there, they had over $1 million worth of capacity fees due to us. And because they're a government entity like we are, we have a note, a contract with them, a note receivable, and they give us this $78,000 each year, and it goes over 15 years, and I don't know, we're in year 3, 4, 5, maybe something like that. The majority, the vast majority of this $525,000 has already come from High Desert Medical Center, okay? In total, since we started collecting sewer capacity fees in 2009, is when that was first authorized, we have only collected for 11 meters, okay? So the vast majority of all of this money comes from High Desert Medical Center. We earned interest of $161 on that. Again, we did no projects with this money. We would have to do a sewer, a wastewater project for growth, okay, with this money. So I reckon it'll sit here for a while. And we ended the year with $613,472. So that's the gist of the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are. And
I actually have one, and then we'll
Certainly.
open it to the rest of the board. When you talk about the number of meters and you didn't get any sewer, that means that they were all outside of the sewer zone?
There's one you can see on page
Yeah.
24, shows there is one that was, one of those 14 was in the wastewater area, but clearly people are
Which is
trying to avoid, you know, it's the downtown corridor
It's the
for the most part. You know, it's sort of a mile, you know, each way of the highway, you know, in simple terms, it's a
And
little
it's
more.
also size dependent.
Yeah, exactly. So larger parcels, even if they're in the area, don't have to pay because the density, you know, it's enough that it's not going to impact the water quality. So that's the strategy there. So yeah, most new development is occurring either outside of this area or in larger parcels, if it's within the wastewater area.
That's
right.
very interesting. Anything from the board?
And which project was that? That was in the wastewater treatment area?
Well, it's just a parcel. It's an individual customer meter. That's just a 3/4 inch meter.
Anybody else have a comment? Any questions from the people in the audience? No. Okay, thank you.
On that subject.
So we're moving on to, oh, I guess, yes, accept.
I move that we review, which we have, and recommend that the board accept and file the annual capacity fee report.
Do I have a
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded that we review, that we accept and file this report. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Unanimous. Item number 8, aquatic inspections proposal dated September 15, 2017 for wet cleaning, inspection, and spot coating repair of reservoirs C1, D1, E1, E2, and J1. Mandy.
Thank you, Madam President. My recommendation today is that the board authorize the district to enter into a contract with Aquatic Inspections for a cost not to exceed $24,000. The Joshua Basin Water District has obtained a cost proposal from Aquatic Inspections to have the following 5 reservoirs inspected, cleaned, and spot repaired as necessary: C1, D1, E1, E2, and J1, as part of the district's ongoing reservoir maintenance program. I would take note that we're in year 3 of 5 with respects to the tanks that we're rehabbing. And in response to the recommendations by the State Water Resource Control Board and the district's most recent sanitary survey, this work is scheduled to be conducted in January 2018. The intent of these inspections is for Aquatic to determine and make a recommendation to the district as to what maintenance would need to be performed at each reservoir, as well as to develop a priority list for the order in which the reservoir should be addressed. Aquatics will prepare and provide to the district a written inspection report and DVD footage for each of the 5 inspections and cleanings conducted. In order to remain as efficient as possible, keep costs down, and respond to any significant cost defects discovered during the cleanings and inspections, Aquatics' proposal provides a per-hour cost of $150 to perform spot coating repairs on these areas upon authorization by the district. These spot coating repairs can only be conducted for this price if the work can be completed within the time frame estimated for the project. If the district elects to defer the spot coating repairs until a later date, or if the number of significant coating defects that are discovered will require repair time beyond the estimated time frame of Aquatic's proposal, the cost for Aquatic to perform the work would be at a rate of $3,050 per day. This cost difference is primarily based on the need for Aquatics to mobilize back to the district to finish the spot coating repairs. Due to the substantial cost savings to have the cleaning and inspection, the district will work with Aquatic to ensure as many of these areas are addressed as possible during the time frame of the proposal. These spot coating repairs are not considered permanent. These repairs are intended to respond to defects discovered that require immediate attention. Once the cleaning, inspection, and spot coating repairs are made, the district will continue with developing the priority list for complete recoating of these reservoirs and other necessary maintenance as planned, required, and recommended by the inspection reports. Fiscal impact. Pursuant to the board's adoption of the district's revised 2-year budget on July 5th, 2017, that included $33,175 for tank and reservoir maintenance. This work has been budgeted for.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
No, I just make a comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I really appreciated this because we've worked on this for at least 3 or 4 years and have had little or no movement. And I really like the fact that the numbers are much lower than they originally were projected. So I'm very happy with this. I think it's a great thing. I have one comment though, or a question.
Sure.
The spot coating repairs are not considered permanent. I don't know anywhere in the CIP or anything that we have budgeted for replacement tanks. Is that what happens?
Yeah, so rehabilitations of the tanks have been budgeted. And so as a result, for instance, in our capital improvement plan today, we have 2 tanks that are called out, and they're very costly. Our largest tank, which is 500,000 gallons, D21, is estimated at $415,000 for rehabilitation work, and that's to recoat the tank as well as do exterior, interior paint, safety precautions, mob, demob, disinfection, different things of that nature. So once again, it's very costly. This is it's not a permanent solution, but it gets you by with exactly what you need to rehabilitate. So why it's been presented in the budget so far is we took roughly half of our tank sites and we estimated based off of those priorities what needed to go into the budget at that time.
So is the terminology rehabilitate versus replace?
Correct. Rehabilitation would occur before you would actually replace the tank.
Okay, okay.
We haven't replaced a tank in my whole time here.
Yeah, well, that's what I
Yeah.
was, yeah.
Right, so
Okay.
they're recoated is what
Okay,
happens,
okay.
right. So this is a temporary kind of
Right.
a patch recoat,
Similar
as
as we
opposed
did
to
on,
that
D2.
periodic every 10 to 20 years, you're supposed to, really revisit and potentially recoat.
Oh, thank you, Randy, very much. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
I just have a quick question. Do these DVDs compete with Netflix in your house?
I love it. They are very fun to watch and see what's analyzed. That's definitely for sure.
All I remember are the bubbles.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen something more interesting with that. Anything from, yes, sir. Please go to the microphone so that we get you on tape. Well, I guess it's not tape anymore.
Better than Netflix.
Yes.
My name's Tom Kane with CAC, and that is Aquatic Inspection the only company that's capable of doing this work?
This was a company that was brought in through our engineering company 2 years ago. There are certainly other vendors that can perform this work. However, they have done a fantastic job of minimizing our costs, in addition to really keeping a progressive spot epoxy and inspection protocol for us.
So these jobs aren't bid?
This particular job was not bid. We've gone through two successive years with this particular company.
And you're satisfied that they're going to give you the good price as anybody would?
They have done a significant job in cutting their price. In fact, the spot epoxy costs have been dropped in half compared to the last time we worked with them, and they've been a very great vendor that we've worked with.
Good.
Yeah, actually, I remember when I first came on the board, we were working with another company, and they were supposed to go and do all of the tanks. It didn't work out well. We finally did we end up suing them or something? But
They didn't sue us, which was even better.
yeah, which was even- but I'll tell you, I went in, I mean, the opening is about that big
Yeah.
to get into one of these tanks, and you go into an empty tank, it is pitch black. It is one of the scariest things I've ever done. I don't ever want to go back into a tank. And I can't imagine how the divers feel when there's water in there, and it's even eerier when there isn't. So, well, we will let them go ahead and do that. So anything else on this item before we move on?
Just wanted to ask Randy one more thing.
Yes, sir.
So I presume then that you kind of keep your finger on the pulse of how they're doing price-wise, and you have access to sort of the industry standards or costs that, you could, as you go along, something would trigger you to put it out to bid again?
Absolutely, yeah. And there's no indication. In fact, this not to exceed price is really a not to exceed. Really half the cost is what they proposed thus far. However, I understand our reservoirs are getting larger. It'll entail more work, and so the cost could increase. But once again, they have done a fantastic job of being reasonable thus far. So yes, we would look at industry standards and see what the price component would be.
Thank you.
Me?
Yes, sir.
The only concern that I would have is these kind of things that happen when there's turnover in an organization, but these spot patches, whatever the term, spot coating repairs that are done, I think we should have a clear understanding of what the lifespan of that temporary repair is and mark our calendars so that we don't overlook something, because I'm sort of detecting that we have sort of let things go here and there, and those tanks are of vital importance, their cleanliness. I mean, do we really want to take the hit that the base took in the Times, I believe it was the Times, I'm not sure, the other day about their failure in their water storage systems over there? That's somebody that's federal, they print their own money.
Right.
Something, it was
Lucky
something
dogs.
administrative that caused the problems, and I'd hate to see us put a patch on something, its lifespan passes, and now we've got a serious problem with a multi-million-dollar tank. That's all. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Anything else before we go on? Item number 9, approve.
Need to
The
approve.
vote.
Yes, please. Thank you.
I would recommend that the board authorize the district to enter into contract with aquatic inspections for a cost not to exceed $24,000.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? It's unanimous. Moving on to item number 9. Approve resolution number 17-7979, amending the administrative code to clarify general manager's authority to expend funds in an emergency and to revise job descriptions.
All
Mrs.
right.
Dreer.
Yes, thank you. Our recommendation tonight is that you adopt Resolution 17-979, which is on page 39 of your packet, the last page. We're recommending 2 changes to the administration code tonight. Our new HR manager, Sarah Johnson, has recognized that our process for reviewing and maintaining up-to-date standards within our job descriptions is quite onerous. It requires that the board approve the most minor change to a job description, which unfortunately has the unintended consequence of allowing job descriptions to get out of date because the process is, is quite lengthy. So her recommendation is that we create a system and memorialize it within the administration code, which says that the general manager has authority to make revisions to, minor revisions to job descriptions which do not materially impact the job description. There's no increase in pay, not substantial changes to job duties, that sort of thing. But where those types of changes are significant, we're considering those major revisions to the job descriptions, and then those would have to come back to the board for approval. So I think that's a really great strategy because, yes, the job descriptions get woefully out of date with just, a myriad of very small things over time, and all of a sudden, it's a big deal. So the language, we put in here, we included the differences between major and minor revisions within the context here. We have the represented group, the union group, so there's a different process which involves getting to the union. So after we've come up with the revisions and our general manager says, yeah, that looks good, we've got to send it to the union and they've got to sign off on it, or we have to negotiate with them. And then once we have a final product, then we would bring that to the board for approval. And it would be very similar for a minor revision, but we wouldn't have to bring it back to the board at that point in time. So I think it's a really great solution to a problem that has, really challenged us for some time. It's exactly why we brought Sarah on, so that we could address these sorts of issues and be consistent and more up to date. So that's the first issue. Then the second issue is that we recently completed actually quite a bit of training on emergency preparedness, and we were advised by the trainer, Gary Sturdivant, who I think you've heard from, that the general manager's authority to expend funds in the case of an emergency needs to be unlimited. Now, I really sort of felt like the language in the admin code kind of said that already, but apparently it really needs to be much more specific than that. It needs to say unlimited. And so we have proposed that change. Currently that language says, it shall be the duty of the general manager to expend the funds necessary to correct an emergency situation. Okay, kind of sounds like that to me. But we're saying that it shall be the duty of the general manager or his or her designee to expend the unlimited funds necessary to correct an emergency situation. So the second component is that this section of the admin code gives that authority to the general manager. What if the general manager's on vacation, like he is right now? Okay, we need to have someone else authorized to make these kinds of decisions in an emergency like that, and so we've proposed that change as well. While I was actually preparing, kind of reviewing my notes from today, I realized that the entire section 4 of the administration code, which is general manager, it's all things about that, and there's about 30 different items. They each, and I mean, I just sort of spot check them, every one of them says general manager. Doesn't say or his or her designee. So I'll kind of talk that out with Gil, but I'm thinking that perhaps some overlying, statement there that when we say general manager, we're really meaning GM or his or her designee, okay? So that in every case, that other person has authority to act, in accordance with the administration code. So that would be a separate matter that we'll discuss and we'll bring back if that seems appropriate. So tonight, we're talking about the changes for job description, minor and major, giving authority to the manager to make minor changes to job descriptions, and then the authority for the general manager or his or her designee to spend the unlimited funds necessary in an emergency situation. Those are the two issues, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
I think we'll start this time with the audience, unless the board wants to go first. Is there any comments from either of you? Johnny?
I'm Johnny Painter from, I live on Copper Mountain Mesa. My first comment is that the word unlimited makes me very nervous. But I note that there's also language that is referenced that Ms. Greer, is that correct?
Yes.
Didn't mention, and that is that the general manager in an emergency, excuse me, the general manager in an emergency also notifies the president of the board. Now, I confess my ignorance on this issue, so I'm assuming that that notification includes a discussion about what those expenditures
Right.
might be and all that other stuff, and that maybe the president of the board will talk to the other board members. But the language that we're talking about doesn't actually specify that, and it does use that unlimited word, which, as I said, makes me very nervous. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I comment on that, Mickey?
Yeah.
Because that clause actually drew my attention as well.
Yeah.
And I want to, if I'm permitted to kind of respond to his concern, because I had an equal concern. It very clearly says that the report by the general manager to the board president will cover the subject of estimated funds. And the board president, by law, would have the power to call an emergency meeting with the board if it was an amount that was of grave concern to her. So she has that fallback position. She doesn't have to make the decision all by herself.
Thank you.
It's going to be a discretionary call, and that's permitted by statutes.
Thank you.
Mr. Marquez?
Al Marquez, Sunfair Community. I'd like to make my comment after the board discusses this item, if you are going to discuss it. Are you going to discuss it before you make a motion on it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'd like to make a comment after you have your discussion. Thank you.
Go to board comment. Start with Mr. Flown.
Yes, ma'am. I'm on page 26 of 39, and under this 4.0401, I hope I'm not getting too tedious about this. It shall be the duty of the general manager to establish district employee positions and job classifications. What's the difference between those two?
It's the same. I mean, the position is the title probably, the classification is the literal job description.
Okay.
And so that again says that the general manager decides or says there's a need for a new whatever, the board has to authorize that, okay? So new requires board authorization.
And then on page 27 of 39, at the very top, there's something about amendments not resulting in alteration to job scope or job title. What's the difference between those two?
Well, scope, it would be the requirements of the job. The title is just, assistant general manager.
Okay. I noticed in here under, just directly down from that, this, the union thing, we'll call it this AFSCME. It says what the procedures are, the process for making minor revisions in the employee's description or job or whatever. And number 3 there, it says after the approval of the union, the general manager can do this and that. And is that the, Gil, is that the right word, approval? Because what I've seen in the MOU, which looks like this, is that all of that kind of, the union does not have an authority to like veto or something, or is that, when you say approval, is that more of a courtesy thing that we offer this to them?
It's not a courtesy. I mean, it's an obligation that we have to negotiate with them on these sorts of issues.
And I assume that's in the MOU?
Yes, yes.
Do you want to look at this? No, not now. Yeah, I was just kind
I mean,
of...
they sign off, and maybe approval isn't the right word, but it is approval. They either say, yes, we concur with this, or we go back and forth and we negotiate something different.
Yeah, because some of these things are sort of where we can advise them of something we're going to do.
but the idea that they have to approve it or the world is going to stop. You know, because under the, there's some listing of employer rights or something right at the beginning of the MOU. I'll try not to take too much longer, Madam President. There's this part, management rights, and there's a couple of them listed in there that kind of indicate that it is within management's rights to do this, that, and the other thing. There's a whole bunch of them in here. There's like 20, 25 or 30 of them in here. You're dying to talk, go ahead.
Nevertheless, the impacts of any of those management rights has to be negotiated.
Okay.
Okay. So we can agree to disagree and go to impasse with them or get some sort of charge brought up against us because we're not negotiating properly. But those are our rights. However, any impacts, if the scope of your job changes, that's an impact. Okay. That has to be negotiated, you know, fairly with the union. So I really feel approval is the right terminology.
I trust your judgment on that, ma'am.
Anything else? Tom?
Checking. This is a rather lengthy.
Yeah, report.
Okay, I think we've already discussed the part about the notification of the president. It's a little bit confusing to me because in other parts of the final document about the duties of the general manager, essentially, it says that we do not have any kind of individually have any kind of a control over anything here. It is the general manager that runs this business,
Yeah.
which I support.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, which I support, but I was just sort of concerned, and he needs that power because I think we go to the herding cats, trying to gather together a quorum to approve certain types of things. We've answered that. I'm done. I've taken too much time. Thank you.
Maybe as a side comment to that, I've been doing all kinds of work, finance work because of the rate study and the fee study and all of that. And I recently had to put together information about our asset value, okay? The asset value on our books right now is over $53 million. And that value is based on cost at the time that it was installed. We're talking about some facilities that are decades, most of them decades old. So, as a couple of examples, we spent $223,000 to build well 14 in 1984. The last two wells cost us $819,000 and $1.2 million
In,
between 7 and 15 years ago. So that's when the last two. So full replacement cost of our best production well, number 14, will easily cost, I mean, if it were completely destroyed, in excess of $1 million. And our records show that it's worth $223,000. The Copper Mountain Mesa Assessment District project pipeline was constructed in 1996, just over 20 years ago, at a cost of about $6 million. That project was installed for $32.71 a foot, which is less than half of the cost that we paid for the last pipeline replacement in the H zone in 2008. Less than half. So, a more reasonable estimate of the real value of our infrastructure is probably $100 million. We have been given from Mike Metz a round number of $1 million per mile for pipeline replacement. And I pray that that includes paving, okay? Even if we want to assume that real cost is $500,000 a mile, we have $160 million worth of pipeline. We have 320 miles. So when you talk about, a couple of $1 million, that's nothing in the scheme of perhaps, if pipeline's $160 million, what's the rest? Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure when it needs to be replaced. So a couple of $1 million, to say, well, let's limit that to $2 million. We're talking about, hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure. That's the real cost. Kind of staggering, really staggering. So, something to think about there.
Yeah.
Unlimited doesn't sound
Thank you for putting that.
all
in
that much.
perspective.
Right, right.
Director Hunt.
Well, getting back to the language regarding the union.
Yeah.
I mean, approval might be fine, but as you were talking, you mentioned the word concur, and I wondered about concurrence.
Sure.
It's a little
yeah.
different than approval.
Yeah.
It has a little different
And actually,
meaning.
Gil asked quietly whether that was actually spelled out in the MOU like that, and I don't think it's spelled out at all in the MOU. It's simply implied by law, by laws of how you negotiate and you work with unions.
Right, and concurrence
Yeah,
suggests a
perfect.
back and forth process until
Doesn't
you
change
get to.
this at all, and if you're more comfortable, that's perfect.
And then on, Tom also spoke to it a little bit, I'm all for this minor revision thing, I want to say that right out of the gate. But the definition is amendments not resulting in alteration to the job scope, job title, and salary adjustments, and you define job scope, so I think I'm pretty comfortable with that. I just wanted a little bit of a definition on that, so.
So, do we want to just say job description? No, job.
Requirements was the word that you used, but
Requirements.
I can live with this the
Okay.
way it is, if other board members can. So I just wanted to have a dialogue about it a little
All
bit. And then the part on expenditure of funds for emergencies, and it might be me just being a little picky grammatically, but to expend the unlimited funds necessary, I don't know, it just sounded a little bit wrong to me, but maybe it is okay. I was thinking it could be to expend the funds necessary without limit to correct an emergency situation, but again, I can live with it, so.
You got that, Beth?
That's nice.
And then lastly, and more importantly, and I think you alluded to it, Susan, I like the idea of the designee, but the first thought I had was, well, what if the general manager is out of pocket and can't be reached? Will that designee and maybe line of ascension of designees be in place? If we have a pipeline break, will Susan be first in line and then Randy
Yes.
second or whatever? So that's just a suggestion that if we're going to have that, you may not be able to reach the general manager
Right.
if you don't have a designee in place, maybe before they go.
That's usually how it works.
My
yeah.
boss makes me acting when
Right.
she's gone.
That's what Kurt does when he
Yeah.
leaves, yeah.
Okay.
Now, perhaps as we discuss what I talked about earlier in section 4, that nothing in there talks about general manager and, or his or her designee. Maybe as we talk about that issue, we could incorporate that line of succession. So that automatically, perhaps that would be defined within, the admin code itself. What if Kurt was gone and I was gone?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Who's
Yeah.
next?
Chain of command. And
Right,
and
exactly.
each of your descriptions
Yes,
could include that
right.
chain of command.
Yes,
You're including
yeah,
you, Susan.
yeah. So, yeah, we'll talk about that.
That's all I had, thank
Good
you.
point.
Yeah, I have a few questions. It says here in point 1 on page 26 of 39, under the analysis, that the existing language suggests that jobs descriptions are reviewed in conjunction with the budget, and the two have nothing to do with one another. Well, how can they have not anything to do with one another if we're going into union negotiations or contracts and altering a PD when that would say I either get a raise or I'm demoted, if indeed there's more significant job requirements?
Well, I think the implication that I took from it was that somehow the job description, not the title or the need to fund the position, had something to do with the budget. That's the perspective I was taking. What somebody does, doesn't have anything to do with the budget.
Well, it
You know.
actually does, because if we increase the salary, then it alters the budget. And as we've gone through this already, most of those jobs are set in there with retirement payout, everything else, for number of employees based on a collective yearly figure. So if you start altering one position or whatever, then we change the numbers. And if we're not budgeted for it, then we can't pay it.
But I mean, that's the whole major revision, that's the difference.
But we're
I mean, this
not-
is gonna be going on constantly. Sarah's all over this, you
She's
know.
all over it, but we only
Right.
do the budget once a year. So we're giving authorization to hire new employees, and it doesn't say anything about this has to be within the confines of the existing budget.
No, I'm just talking about job descriptions.
No, it talks about the budget. It says we're not gonna do this biannually. Biannually, we go through the whole process of what we afford to pay for retirement and salaries.
But that doesn't have anything to do with the job description. Benefits
Well,
are not laid out
it's-
in a job description.
It also goes on to say and/or salary adjustments. So when he comes and brings us before the finance committee, then what are we supposed to do? Say
Well,
we're
either
not
we're
budgeted?
going to approve an adjustment to the budget, or we're not gonna approve it.
Well, it just seems like a lot
You
of
know?
extra work. But that being said, I find the timing on this a little interesting, because are we not going through a staff review and
We just got the
Report.
proposals, but yes.
proposal? So this could radically change the work that the staff study's supposed to be accomplishing.
Well, they're not amending job descriptions.
No, but they're gonna come back and say how many positions you think you should have.
But that doesn't have anything to do with job descriptions.
It will tell you how many job positions you have, and if we're hiring or firing, it will alter it.
But that doesn't have anything to do with the process for changing existing job
If you have a
descriptions.
new employee, it certainly doesn't, because it has cost.
But that would be a new job description
Then it
that would
would
have
be-
to come before the board. A new position would have to come before the board.
Well, even if we're making revisions, as Tom alluded to, I think the union's gonna probably say something, but that was my comment on that. So, that's number one. And then number two, when we go back to the final Article 4 of the general manager, page 34, on section 4.03, the general manager will have authority to control, give direction to all employees. The general manager will also hire, remove, promote, demote, and all employees in the districts. Consultants will be directed by the general manager. Consultants will be hired and removed by the board of directors. When did this start happening?
This been here for years and years and years and years,
And they're
forever.
And we've hired consultants?
Yes, we hired the Kathleen, yes.
Yeah,
We
like
did.
Dudek, Gill, I mean,
Yeah.
those are consultants.
We're the ones that approved that.
We approved the contract. We have never gone through a process that says this consultant is contracting or bidding against the
Well, you
job.
haven't, but prior boards
I
have.
have.
Right,
Well, okay,
right.
no, that was news.
There is a difference there. That's a legitimate observation you're making.
Well, I just
Yeah,
found it
because,
very
attorneys,
interesting.
attorneys aren't consultants. We were hired, we serve at the pleasure of the board. You dismissed it
Was
anytime.
I looking you in there, Gil? I had
Yeah, I'm
mine-
in there.
I wasn't shooting
My
at you.
memorandum says that.
Oh, okay.
I don't think, don't mix apples with oranges.
Right.
And I'm sure that staff hires consultants absent board approval, don't you? I don't want to get in the mix of this debate, this discussion, but it seems like, plenty of times I've observed the fact that
Well,
that's a staff
you-
function. And you only come to the board for those kind of, if it's part of a budget, overall budget for a
I
project.
might
I think your
accept it.
observation is very legitimate.
Well, I think there's probably a number of things happening right now that this hasn't gone this way.
I'll bring that to Kurt's attention.
Excuse me, allergies. If we move on to the expenditure for emergency funds, I think that's a great idea. I'm on point 4.07.
On what page?
I'm sorry, yeah.
27.
36 and 39.
27, isn't it?
36 or 40, oh, I'm sorry, 36 or 39? 4.04.07 is
Oh.
where I have it.
Got it.
And I think we sort of beat this, but the general manager or his or her designee shall notify the president as soon as possible as the nature of the emergency and the estimated funds required. Does that mean it's approval, consent, or we're conferring? Because I think it's vague.
Well, I think it's just notification. Then it's incumbent upon the president to say, gosh, that I'm really uncomfortable with that, or I really feel like I need to tell the rest of the board, let's call an emergency meeting.
Okay.
Because the president has to call an emergency meeting.
But is that inferred? Because I don't see that.
Well, it says she'll notify.
Well, I
The-
mean, the GM's notifying the president. I
Right.
have all faith in presidents.
Right.
And there we are, but what if the president isn't about?
Well, then they would call the vice president.
Well, I'm assuming, but see,
Right.
this is assumptions, and you know what they say about assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
So, appeal, confer.
The president or
consent.
his or her designee.
Because I think there's a huge liability here if I'm reading into this, Gil, but just help me. But if you all start spending unlimited amounts of money and there's no accountability and nobody's going to be the fall guy, because the fiduciary responsibility of the board is to keep us solvent. So all of a sudden, if we make a misstep, there it is. And I would prefer personally to know that the president said, yes, do it immediately versus, oh, like, whatever. I just did it and happened and notified her later.
But these sections only really refer to the general manager's responsibilities, not
Right.
the board's
No,
responsibilities.
but the fact
It
is that
ends
the
there.
president's not about, and we don't know that she approves, confers.
Then that's board policy
Well,
matters.
it has.
This is only goes
it will
as
have
far as the
policy.
general manager.
Sure, but he can't act if he doesn't have any authority to act.
I think that most of the stuff that's in here is the stuff that's required by FEMA for reimbursement.
I got that, right.
And if it doesn't say what they think it needs to say, and I think unlimited is their word, that we don't get reimbursed. So I think that one of the things you're fighting now is the federal government, which you know a lot about, so.
And that's why I want to bring those flags, so Gil, if you have a revelation.
No, I appreciate your concern. We could put words in there that could be subject to board approval.
Or president's approval, I mean, that has a.
I think that's worthy of additional, a sentence or two.
But I think
I don't
if you go to board approval and it's say it's the
Right,
earthquake,
right.
I think the-
and
You
you,
don't need, yeah, you could.
and you can't, I mean,
Yeah,
you were
President-
here last time,
No, that's why I'm saying the president's fine with me.
but if you can't reach people, you can't have a meeting, so you just need to
Well,
understand
there's a
how
rule of,
awful it
okay,
can get.
there's some legal comments I could help you
Okay,
work through this
so-
process. You know, you don't, when you have an emergency, like you said, you refer to an earthquake would certainly be, could be an emergency, probably would be. You don't have to go through the notice procedures for a board meeting, you just call everybody out. And if one person showed up, the rule of necessity says the power, the common law rule of necessity says the power would shift to that one person who showed up.
The designated survivor.
Wow, yeah.
You don't need three, you don't need two.
Love
There's a
it.
rule of necessity if it comes to that would come into play. But I could work with Susan and put a couple of words in there to,
I'm just
oh,
adding.
she doesn't need my help, she could do it.
I'm
She
just
knows
adding
it
to the
better than me.
conversation. Page 37 of 39.
Bob,
Sir.
I wanted to make just a comment on that particular point before you move on. For me, and I'm just seeking clarity here and agreement, consensus, but I feel like in a true emergency, the general manager needs to be able to act and expend funds immediately, like it could be before, even doing anything else. But to me, the way this is laid out, they may do that, but then they need to pick up the phone and call the president, and if they're not available, the next person in line, and if they don't, they are accountable
Right.
to all of us. So,
However
but
it's written,
Yeah.
that's the liability I'm talking about. So then somebody needs to say yea or nay, and, for whatever expenditures are there, and I think it needs just to be clear. So that was my comment, but that can be tweaked however you do that. Sure,
So can I ask for some clarification, since it sounds like we want to make a change? So it's not only notifying the president, but successively, if that if the president isn't available,
Well,
is
I mean,
that?
whoever's next in line.
Right, okay.
Last standing.
And then the other issue is that that person is supposed to approve or authorize, because it doesn't really say
No,
that
it
at
just
all,
says-
and it didn't say that before.
Yeah, it just says, okay, we got it, so I don't know what the legal part's gonna come, because I'm
Okay.
sure that's then when Gil will have to go to work.
It really was covered when I answered this gentleman's
Yeah.
question. And
Yeah,
that was, it would be the chairman or chairwoman's
Right.
discretionary call.
Yeah.
And you said you were satisfied with that, and I think that would work.
Well, just as long as there's accountability with it. Yeah, that's the primary
Yeah,
focus here.
And if there's any discomfort by the chairwoman, she can call an emergency meeting.
Sure.
Whoever shows up or doesn't show up,
Well, I mean,
They're gonna
full-
have the power
Full
to-
trust in the staff, it's
Yeah.
just, making sure that the boxes are checked as we go down the line.
I understand your concern, unlimited, that makes me
Well, it's a
don't
big
nervous.
challenge.
Oh, yeah.
Gotta have
We
some kind
figured
of-
there'd be concern.
I think we all quaked.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll never get a new well 14. Page 37 and 39, 4.04.19, news media. I know this is kind of picky, but I would hope that the general manager is talking to the board president prior to any news releases or media releases, and that there would be some sort of concurrence with the president or somebody that's on the board.
I don't know per se.
Why?
Not prepared to talk about that tonight.
How about the public information officer?
Public
That's the-
information officer talking to the board or the
No,
president?
that's the person that talks to the public.
Kathleen.
That's Kathleen.
Well,
She runs things
then
through
have-
staff,
Well, run
just
through
like I
staff.
approved something today
Yeah,
because Kurt wasn't
I'm thinking
here.
that I would prefer to have one of the board members, preferably the president, at least know what's going in the media before the media notifies her.
Do we have an emergency response plan that's been adopted by the board?
Yes.
I think it's
Would this be proper
I
subject
don't,
material for
well,
that
you may
document?
have one, but I don't know the board knows what it
I mean, the
is.
process you're talking about, Robert, could be placed in that document, probably where it should be.
But that's only for emergency. We
Yeah.
wouldn't pick that up ordinarily. Most often, we're not dealing with emergency.
What would you?
In an emergency, you're probably not gonna go look for the document.
Right.
Well,
I'm just looking for bad PR, and I mean, primarily, I want the news to be straight and, accurate, and just make sure that someone's preferably said that's good to go.
and it sounds like you're talking about a policy statement, much like the Las Vegas Police Department has, where only the chief speaks for the PD. You're talking about, does this district have policy statements? Okay.
So I'd like to make a suggestion, because Bob, that particular item isn't up tonight. This is these are the existing articles that apply to the general manager. And Susan talked about maybe looking at all of them, for that designee thing. So I'm thinking that your suggestion about the news media could
Certainly.
roll over to a future agenda item.
Well, I mean, there's 30 items in here,
Right.
and we're getting,
Right.
piecemeal, so that's the other part
I
of
may
it.
put
too.
Because it wasn't an
ad hoc
overall-
committee together.
Right.
Because frankly, you're driving me.
But my point is that this is only in here tonight because
Yes.
Susan is proposing to amend
Particular
part of it.
sections,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
But,
so,
think about it though, if you're amending part of it, then what does the rest of it say? So we're dealing with half a document.
oh, sure,
So, that's the other part of the argument here. I can only work with what I have.
right.
Can I have 10 seconds? Just simply,
Can I
when
go
it,
home now?
when it comes to some of these notification things to the board president and such, and approvals or whatever all that discussion was, just when you consider that stuff, read 4.02 under the description of it generally is director-manager relations, and in particular the second half of it. Because it says that, well, I won't bother, I had promised 10
That I
seconds. didn't I?
don't get to give orders, then I know that. I'm very well aware of that. Okay.
This is the last part, I promise. 4.06 on page 38 of 39, temporary manager. Now, this is a gruesome scenario. Suppose we don't have a manager or whatever, how then does the right of succession come? And I'm just using this as sort of a military analogy, but if we don't
Temporary
have
manager on page
subject to board
32.
approval, the disability of the manager, and if the manager cannot make an appointment, the president will make an appointment. If staff, for some reason, is incapacitated,
All staff?
all staff,
Okay.
or a staff.
Good luck.
Well, no, I'm just,
If you're all incapacitated, it was like,
this is catastrophic.
Just gonna quit, yeah.
This is catastrophic. But just right of succession, how does that work? So, and this is more of a question, but sort of, I'm just thinking outside the box. There's not a agency or anything that comes in and does general manager or temp stuff. So.
No, not in the, not in the short term.
No,
Yeah,
not in the short term,
right,
but I know
right.
we got temps that do whatever they
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
So what is the protocol or procedure? I mean, does it go down, is there a hierarchy? I got it. No, okay, is that written somewhere?
I don't think so, and it goes back to the thing that I talked about earlier, that whole succession thing, and that we should spell it out in here.
Well,
Yes, we
does
should.
If not the GM, then the AGM, then the, you know, whatever.
that make you happy,
Right.
Gary?
yeah.
That's all.
Thank you. Director Under.
I found both these things very timely. Sarah, who's a real good hire, has been going through these things.
yeah.
And Kurt, too, we've had these come up to us, as we
Yes.
need to fill positions.
Right.
So now we have to update them, because what do we need now?
Right.
So I found this very, very timely,
yeah.
and,
Well, and it really delays the process. When now all of a sudden somebody's given their notice and now we have to review and get union approval and board approval, I mean, that in itself can be a month
when you
or
put it out, when you
two.
put it out for, you know.
Yes,
and it was-
right.
So this is,
Right.
and this has happened, so
Yes.
I saw this very
Yeah,
timely.
it has happened.
And then with the, about the expenditure of funds, I guess, until I got down to like the FEMA stuff, I was just thinking about what happened in July when that big old pipe broke. And Kurt was standing in line to get up board a plane,
Right.
you know, and how all that went. And so, and it was, I'm going like, I was reading under 4.04.07 on page 27, and it says, this is just kind of the commenting, it authorizes no one other than GM to spend such emergency funds. It needs to be rectified, because you're talking about, you know, kind of like who the designee or kind of comes up. It said, we don't want there to be any doubt or find that such expenditure of funds doesn't qualify for reimbursement after the fact. And I said, what? And it wasn't until I read further on that I see what we're talking about FEMA. So this is.
Or CALO, yes. I mean, state or federal, right.
So, and when we talk about expending funds, we're not talking about that person who's gonna take the checkbook right there and start writing checks necessarily.
No, it
It's
ordinarily isn't like that. It's authorizing, you know.
something to take place.
It's like
We
if
need to have
you-
this repair,
Right.
we need to have something done.
Right.
And
Well, we
send
found
us the
out,
bill.
we found out recently through our training that, you know, there's all this, assistance. I mean, that agencies work together, you know, to provide help and assistance. When you go out and make these requests and somebody finds the crew or the equipment or whatever it is that you need, you have to commit in writing to everything that it takes to pay them, because they're sending them to you, they're employee, but you got to provide for them. So it's pay and equipment and, you know, housing for them and food for them. It's like they become your employee.
Yeah.
And so you have to commit to that at the time, you
yeah.
know? And if you're talking about something catastrophic, you're going to be competing for resources. So you better have the authorization that says, yes, I'm ready.
Get right up in line and
I
say.
need these 5 crews and that equipment.
we can
you know,
do that.
Yeah.
So I
Remember,
fi- I
there were
found
over
it-
300 mainline leaks in Bighorn Desert View after the Landers quake.
Oh, it was catastrophic.
Over 300. We ourselves incurred over $500,000 of loss
Then,
then, and we had it easy compared to what happened at these other agencies.
I would say all my fellow directors, you know, made good points. Since you're updating it, some of the things I saw, I kept finding all those old archaic his and him and he's. And so I went through and I circled a bunch. They should be
Yes.
consistent with
Yeah.
with the modern language of his/her. And I think that after everything else that we've gone through, I think just to go through that, and something I didn't know was that the general manager has to file 4.04.15, filing. It is a duty of the general manager to keep the district's files up to date.
Well, he doesn't file.
Thank you.
You
He has
see
responsibility for the filing
Clinton
system. Yeah.
Thank you. So, someday we're gonna have to replace Kurt, and we have to tell the person that filing's involved, or, okay. But that was it, just after all the good comments that my fellow directors have made, and all the things that they've looked at, really, drilled down into stuff, just looking for those his/her language, going through and cleaning that up, that would be about it.
Yeah.
And when I didn't understand why it was not two different resolutions, but it's the same article.
Right.
So that made sense to me.
Okay, and my comments are on page 30 of 39. AFSCME Article 5, after committee approval, committees don't approve, committees review. So any place where it says committee approval, it should say committee review. Because you can't have someone on a committee decide that the answer is no and stop it from coming to the board.
Duh.
So,
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
that language, that's the only thing I have. And Mr. Marquez, it's now your turn, sir.
And there's a
You're all
spelling error on that page, it's General Manger.
Oh, I saw the general manager too. Yes.
Sorry, Al.
Which one is that?
No problem.
Page 30, on the MSC revision process.
Number 3.
Number 3, General Manger.
Oh, got it, okay,
Manger,
thank you.
yeah.
Got it.
Okay, Al.
Away in a manger.
Al Marquez, Sunfair Community. Thank you for the 3 minutes. I'm really enjoying the discussion that the board is having on a mine item on the agenda, which they normally don't do, but that's here nor there. I'd like to point out that the board of directors is supposed to give the manager direction on everything that the manager does for this district. They're the last word for everything that happens in this district. In the past, the manager was authorized $5,000 of funds that he could spend without going through the board of directors. Then it went up to $10,000, and I think right now it's up to $20,000 if I'm correct. I have a problem with discretionary spending by the general manager on emergency situations. Now, what is minor and what is major? It's the discretion of the manager to decide which one is which without board information. The board, like I said, the board has to give the manager direction on all this. So these revisions that you have on here, I think it should go back to the board and have some kind of a workshop on it, because these are major revisions on the authority of the board, of the manager of the district. And on the job position and stuff like that, the board in the past has always had input on job descriptions, jobs, increases of their position, like a lead man to a supervisor and stuff like that. At least the board was able to make those decisions. Of course, I didn't agree with them, but that's here nor there. But the way this thing is written up, I would hope that the board would not pass this item and ask for other revisions to make it more detailed for, like I said, on major and minor emergencies, to have it more detailed of what is major and what is minor. And there's another more detailed information on some of these items on this 04 manager's responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else have any final?
I think Mr. Marquez is confusing major and minor changes to job descriptions with major and minor emergencies.
How would you classify the pipe break in July? Was that a major or minor? I would have considered that a major.
Me too.
Definitely.
Minor is when there's, well, and it's inconvenient, but when a pipe broke
Right.
on sunset,
Yeah.
sunburst rather, And the guys were there, I mean, they had to dig a big hole, the guy used the word tool to fix it and stuff like that. That was minor compared to that busted 20-inch pipe, which was major. And yeah, I mean, Al is right. We are the boss, the general manager. It's so important that the board chooses trustworthy, reliable, intelligent general managers. I mean, it's a huge responsibility. And you guys just went through that with Kurt. And you had to be interim general manager between Gazetta and Kurt.
Yeah.
And, you know, we'll have to choose another general manager
Someday.
again, too. It's a huge responsibility. No, Al is absolutely right. And we're not giving up any control. We do delegate. We have, the board of directors has kind of a limited job description, you know? We really do. And, of course, the buck always stops with the board, but we have kind of a limited job description, whereas we do delegate a lot of authority to our staff, our crew, our admin, management. That's how I see it.
Thank you.
So, I'd like to move.
Okay?
I'd like to move that we approve resolution number 17-979 with minor amendments that we discussed, the couple language changes that I recommended, the review instead of approve, and the spelling change. And I move that we approve it with those minor amendments. In the context that you're going to go back and look at the entire article
Right.
and maybe come back to us with more refinements.
Is there a second?
I'd like to make comment on that. If we're gonna make the corrections or the additions or whatever, why don't we just have that come back and then vote on that?
So you want to table it?
Send it
I
back.
would like to see the corrections.
Okay, excuse me, I want to hear what she wants.
I'm okay with the change with regard to unlimited, if that's what the sticking point is. I would really like the board tonight to give authority to the general manager or his or her designee. Okay, that really,
The meat.
yes,
I
okay.
think that, I agree, I think that's
Okay.
important, because you never know when we're gonna need it, then I would just as soon have it in place, and if we need to tweak it later, we can tweak it later.
It just-
And I think that the changes to the job description issue could wait or not. It feels like they're fairly benign, in my opinion anyway, but, I mean, they could wait. There's no urgency there. The urgency tonight really is his or her designee. Let's make sure that we've got that base covered, okay? If we're uncomfortable with unlimited funds, if that's the issue.
Does this infer with the designee that the board president has been notified or has approved or consented to authorization of expenditures?
I mean, I don't think that's what it says. Nowhere does it say
No, it
that they have to
It says who her
approve.
designee.
They said they have to, it says they have to share the information, but it doesn't say they have to approve it. It already says the general manager, and we're recommending, or his or her designee, shall notify the president of the board as soon as possible as to the nature of the emergency and the estimated funds required to remedy the situation.
So there's no liability there without having the board president authorize or?
I'm guessing that the
or-
emergency nature is what changes the dynamic there. Is that true, Gil?
Yeah, you're giving full discretion to the general manager. You know, the only obligation he has is to notify the board president. Upon receipt of that information, our chairman could decide maybe an emergency, this is a lot of money, I'm a little nervous about it, she could call an emergency meeting. You could put that language in there, but it's just the way it would work if you trust your president and your general manager.
Well, it's not a matter of not trusting, it's just a matter of the liability that would happen if indeed a bad decision was made.
Well, it'd be a personal liability.
Well, and then the personal liability comes to the board, and that's why I'm suggesting that there be some written statement saying then whatever that is gonna be deferred to the GM for the responsibility.
Okay, let's just calm down, let's just pause for a second. Let me see if I understand your concern. You want some form of approval from the board president, rather than just notification?
Or consent or concur, yes, something that's for real.
Excuse me, but 99% of the time, the board president is not going to have enough information to be able to make a judgment that this is the right call. I'm not an engineer, you're not an engineer. We're not engineers, we don't know. So you're trusting that your general manager and your staff are giving good information as to what is necessary, and that's what we're giving him approval to do, is what is necessary to fix the situation.
That delegation of authority is best made to your general manager, not one board member. It really.
Well, I don't mean one board member, but I mean a representative of the board. That's what I'm
That's one
assuming the
board
president means.
That'd be one
But you
board
don't-
member.
That's one
you don't
board
know
That's
enough
one board
as a board
member.
member to
That-
know
that'd
what
be-
needs to be done.
I don't think that's proper government. That's not good government.
You act together,
The
right.
general manager has discretion, but the board doesn't act as a
So
sole
the
person.
personal liability that comes as a result of a bad decision then goes to the general manager, or does it come to the board?
General manager. Unless you get, yeah, general manager. He's the one that makes the call. It's his job. If you want to make his discretionary call to be subject to board approval, you've got to tell the board president on her discretion.
So if the board is sued, then the board members are not going to be liable.
Well, I don't believe you will be. Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess in my, go ahead.
If you get down in the weeds, you will invite personal liability. That's why I know your chairwoman is always an advocate of, we dictate policy, we let the general manager do his job. Stick to that premise, you'll never go wrong, Robert, and you won't invite personal liability.
And you said that we look over his shoulder and we tell him what to do. We do not.
Who does?
The board does not tell, the general manager manages their.
He carries out board policy.
On board
Yeah,
policy, but
you
he
as a
doesn't come to
board,
us.
individually, and even as a board, can't get down in the weeds on
No.
discretionary calls.
Yeah, I was gonna,
Go ahead.
you know, and you probably have too, Bob, being in the military, but I've been involved in incident command situations a number of times, responding to emergencies myself, and you need a person that, I think like the general manager in this case, when you have a true emergency that can act. And I would posit that other organizations are set up the same way, that this is not an uncommon practice. And I think that you could have liability the other way around if the general manager was hesitating to act till they reached and gained concurrence with the board representative. They may not be making decisions they need to make right in the midst of the emergency. So anyway, I just wanted to tell you, I feel comfortable with it overall.
You could add, to notify the board president, not for approval, but she'll notify the board president, or upon her, at her discretion or his discretion, would have we call it an emergency meeting. You could have that in there. The words I told you, you could actually put in there.
Well, personally, I would feel better with that, but I'm just one person here.
Yeah, I know, but you're asking your fellow board members if you want that
We
language.
just,
Yeah, I
in
would-
light of all that's going on.
By implication, that could happen, but it doesn't hurt to put those words in there. That board president would have the discretion to call an emergency meeting. She has that authority, she has that
I
statutory
have that
authority.
authority anyway. And, were you here in the earthquake?
Yes.
As you know, it was really hard to get around, and the idea of the board members coming in here and suddenly deciding they're in charge scares me to death. Because we don't know what's needed and wanted.
No, nobody's asking you for that, they're just asking you to approve or disapprove whatever their actions are.
Why would I,
Well, can I read, let me just read a couple of lines here. The general manager shall take his orders and instructions from the board of directors only in a duly held meeting of the board of directors. And no individual director will give any orders or instructions to the general manager. And that would include the president, as Gil said, because it's a board person. So, it's, a lot of that's already here in this thing. It's sprinkled in here throughout. That he's the guy in charge, and that in some cases, approval of the board is required, like some of these things about hiring people and changing positions and stuff. It all says, it's sprinkled in here, that the board has to approve those things. There isn't really a surrender. I was concerned about that initially, that there was a surrender of a lot of authority or power from the board to the general manager, but when I read through this general manager description, appendix A, Article 4, I'm not seeing it. I'm saying that we still have, this simply, the stuff we're talking about right now gives them a chance to move and act decisively during a time when we're bleeding water all over the highway or doing whatever the disaster is.
Right.
He needs to be able to act decisively,
And immediately.
moment by moment.
Yeah.
And we can't do a lot of falderall and fooling around and head scratching over this stuff and having subcommittee meetings and other kinds of stuff. There's times when something has to be done.
Well, this
And
is
we
not
should let
saying
him do
whether
it.
may I, it's reporting in and saying, this is what's happened, FYI, this is what you have on your left and this is what you have on your right. Am I on target? Roger Dodger, out.
Right, a second brain, you're saying?
Yes,
Is that,
sir.
yeah, sure.
I'm not asking whether
Sure.
may I.
It
Yeah,
could,
go
it
ahead.
could be as simple as, instead of shall notify, it could be shall notify and consult with the president of the board as soon as possible.
Well, I make it the president just because I have a lot of admiration for Mickey and her wisdom. So,
Me too.
Well, I mean, the president's already in there, but I share your
Next.
admiration.
You're sitting right here, you could be next president.
Damage control.
All right,
But I think Gil was suggesting that maybe just a little bit of tweaking of the language would make it clearer, so.
okay.
I have a
that's not-
suggestion.
Yeah.
What if we make the only change tonight to be to add or his or her designee to section 4.0407? Do we have any issues with the other part, the job description revisions?
I don't.
Okay.
Does anyone?
No.
No.
Okay, so we could do that. Leave the unlimited out, leave all this other stuff out, and then perhaps come back to those subjects.
Okay.
I'm not exactly clear with the words that you're looking for, Bob, and so, you know,
I was looking more for Gil's words because I was just trying to save all of us from.
but I mean, we can't really approve
No, not
words
today.
that we haven't drafted
No,
tonight.
That's why
okay?
I was hoping he'd have an epiphany or a
Yeah.
revelation on his.
Hasn't
own.
come yet,
The
so,
only thing I keep saying is that you can't act individually. And by statute, there is discretion on the board president. When a
Well, yeah,
situation
I
comes,
wasn't
when the situation,
promoting
or
this
hers,
for-
they're aware of a situation that she has the discretion to call an emergency
That's-
meeting.
Yeah.
And that's the only fallback, and that's the only thing that'll protect you from personal liability or whatever else concern you have about acting individually. But you only act as a board, you don't act individually. I don't like the word her approval. I don't like the word his approval of a board member. That is just not good government, and it's probably an unlawful delegation of authority. So think of yourselves as one unit, you act together. I think Susan was going to suggest, I like what she was going to suggest. You've all brought up some really good issues, none of them apply to the job description.
right,
Let's
right.
go, why don't you go with that tonight?
Yeah, okay.
Give us some time to chew on the other observations you've all made, really good observations
Right.
individually and collectively. And she's going to do some exploration on that trainer's recommendation that unlimited has to be necessary.
You know, we didn't vet
I'm
that
not
with
convinced
FEMA. I
that
mean, it's
that's
hard to get
required.
through to FEMA. But,
Oh, that's
you know,
not a
I mean,
FEMA word?
That came from our trainer, okay?
I think we need to get a foundation
And
for
yeah,
that.
I mean, let's find out. You know, let's
So-
talk with FEMA, and maybe they even have a sample, language. A lot of times you get that kind of stuff from organizations like that, so.
And instead of unlimited, it could be the necessary.
Yes.
That's what we already
That's what we
had.
got.
We already have, yeah.
That's not
Yes, it
strong
does.
enough. It's like, that's what I
does.
said,
It
it
seemed
really
okay to me
kind of
the way it
says
was.
that already.
Necessary sounds great.
Right, right.
Okay,
strong
so
enough.
with that, do I have a motion to do the
I'll revise my motion.
administrative code on the employees?
Changes to 4.0401,
4.0401.
40407 to add or his or her designee.
Yes,
Okay.
that's my
What she
amendment
said,
motion.
yeah.
Okay, she's got it written down. Do I
Yep.
have a second?
I second.
All in favor? Let's do a roll call. Dr.
Aye.
Flown, Dr. Hunt,
Aye.
Director Johnson,
No.
Director Unger?
So I understand, we're only voting on the part that has to do with the job stuff.
And 40407 adding or his or her designee, not changing unlimited funds, okay?
Okay, so,
Or any of the other changes that were discussed, so we'll bring all that back.
Oh, okay, aye.
aye. 4-1.
That was fun.
Yeah, that was a lively discussion.
That's the most fun we've had in a long time.
You're right, Beverly, it feels warm in here now.
A lot of hot air emanating from ideas, huh?
Just pounding. Sure.
District General Counsel report.
I have no report tonight. Nothing. Kurt and I are working on several important projects, none of which require commentary tonight.
Thank you. General Manager, Assistant General Manager.
We have a small report. I'm sure that no one has forgotten the big water leak on July 28th in the ensuing boil order. As a result of the leak, which wasn't repaired until about noon the following day, we were unable to fill our tanks during the night. So we had to actually pump during the day, the following day, during on-peak pumping time. We always pump during the night, during off-peak, super off-peak even, to get the lowest Edison rates. Because of our rate structure, pumping during on-peak times results in penalties. We have some prior experience with such a penalty. Approximately 20 years ago, I think that one of the pumps got turned on by the SCADA system, ran for a very short time, but we incurred a penalty of almost $20,000. I was really anxious about this penalty. So many years later, with thinking about what happened to Edison rates in the last 20 years, and the penalty is based on the highest power demand at the particular location during the entire month. Okay. As a result of the installation of soft starts on all of our wells, which reduces the significant power demand required to start a well, which is as much as 3 to 5 times more than running the well. The power demand is far lower than it was 20 years ago. And our penalty, wait for it, $4,600 instead of the $20,000 plus that I was fearfully anticipating.
Wow.
We also recently learned the amount of money that we save each year by taking advantage of SCE's super off-peak rates. And Southern California, per Southern California Edison, Randy does a great job out there minding his operations, referring to our production supervisor, Randy Little. We learned that the district avoids approximately $84,000 annually in power costs by using a savvy pumping strategy, again, SCE words. That means we're saving approximately 20% using this kind of pumping strategy, but still paid over $338,000 last year for pumping power. It's simply one of our largest expenses. Flashback to the past. I ran across some information recently. I'm doing all of this information gathering, rate and fee study, lots of data has to be provided. And I thought the board might find it interesting, comparing the year ending 6/30/1989 to 6/30/2017, a period of 28 years. I started at the district January 1988, so this isn't long after that time frame. We had 3,500 customers back then. We have over 5,500 now. The district had 16 employees, and now we have 21 and a half. The district had 180 miles of pipe, and now 320. 4 wells then, 5 wells sort of now. 14 reservoirs, now we have 17. We pumped 1,750 acre-feet of water then and only 1,357 this year. Conservation, folks. Everybody's per capita usage has come down.
Say it again, Susan, please.
1,750 then, 1,357 last year. Decrease of 22%, and the only thing in the entire report, the entire list, that decreased. The amount of water we pumped. The value of our assets back then was $10.5 million. It's $53.3 million now. Operating revenue, this will crack you up, $658,000. Now it's $3.4 million. Operating expense, $1.2 million, now $4.4 million. So just a little bit about how the district has changed and grown in all these years. this is more about numbers than about how things have changed. For example, in this time frame, we went from bi-monthly to monthly billing. We immediately doubled all cost and all effort associated with billing our customers. Twice as many meter reads, twice as many bills, twice as many payments. Okay. A lot of things like that have happened over the years, and we're really feeling the pain, the struggle of keeping up. And so I thought this was really kind of some meaningful and poignant information to share with the board. So that's all I have for tonight. Yes.
Thank you.
When you were talking about this earlier about, you know, the assets, 55 million, that's not their replacement cost.
Correct. That's
So how
what's,
do you value, do you value when you're doing these valuations to replacement costs like you would on an insurance policy?
Not ordinarily. You would look at those as, you know, as two separate, I mean, we don't adjust our books. You know, we don't increase the value of our assets on our books to reflect replacement value. We would want to be funding for replacement value. And we just finished our field work for our audit a couple weeks ago, and when I met with the auditor, I shared with him that we were moving forward with a rate and fee study, and he said, fund depreciation. Okay, so our depreciation expense is $1.2 million. But if your depreciation expense is based on $53 million worth of assets, when really it's 100 or 200 million, then you're not funding enough depreciation. And depreciation is that incremental piece of that cost, you know, expensed over the lifetime of the asset. So, you know, if your pump lasts 50 years, then 1/50th of the cost is how much is expensed each year. That's your depreciation expense. So we're not funding near enough depreciation expense, and we're not even funding depreciation. So, you know, big challenge for us.
How do we insure our assets?
They are based on the value that actually Aqua JPIA provides to them. So they have a whole department there, a real nice fella there, and whenever we add something, if it's new and it's pretty common, you know, we always provide what our cost was, but if our cost isn't really representative of what that replacement is, or it actually wouldn't even be replaced. For example, we don't insure fences. You know, a chain link fence, what's going to happen to it? You know, they get vandalized more than they get, you know, destroyed in any way. They help us put the value to those assets based on their, you know, wide experience in engineering and all of that kind of stuff.
Put a tank, a well.
Right. I mean, they help us with that. They do that. I mean, it's based on gallons, you know, gallons that you can pump per minute, what's the size of the motor, how big is the casing. I mean, they know all that kind of stuff, and that's the sort of information that we have to provide to them so that they can come up with that cost.
Thank you. All right. We will go to direct reports on meetings attended and future agenda items. Is this the time when we'll just go through and do all the direct reports? They changed, the agenda's changed, I'm not sure. I think we'll do that. We'll start with Director Unger.
I went to the Mojave board meeting of September 14th. Our representative Jim Ventura was not there, nor was Carl Coleman. Everyone who's going to Mojave knows we're talking about the water fix. And the night I went, Kathy Kortner, the CFO, talked about the water fixes, the project's benefits, costs, and risks. And, said this is one of the costs that we're facing. It's going to get passed on to Mojave. She added, though, that without the water fix, those two tunnels, that Mojave could see long-term access to state water project water decrease from 53 to 68 million acre-feet a year to 48 to 53 million acre-feet a year. And she felt that Mojave's ability to provide water would be vulnerable by 2054 without the fix. But currently, the capital costs for that project are $16.7 billion, including construction, management wages, contingency costs, land purchases, and the benefits are going to be split between the two major agencies, 45% to the Central Valley, who's on the project, and 55% for the State Water Project. And so that's the benefits and cost split. And they're talking, though, about ways that they're going to have to try to do some funding for their costs, Mojave's cost to buy in. They're talking, their consultant from Raftelis, Sanjay Gwar, was there, and he said they're looking at either 30 to 40-year bonds. Payments and financing could begin as early as 2019. And they were floating financing ideas like a property tax increase, capacity fees based on equivalent dwelling units, or even the sale of table A water at $5,500 an acre foot starting in 2025. They're looking at all this stuff. And Kortner said that the low-hanging fruit is gone as relates to additional water supplies, and the consultant Gar said that they would sell table A water when hell freezes over. General Manager Tom McCarthy said the main signatories of the project, including Metropolitan Water District and the Department of Water Resources, they're going to vote on committing to the project on October 10th. It's pretty certain that they will vote to commit. Included in the vote, they're going to be voting for an adaptive management plan. They're going to form a joint powers authority. And this gap funding, which is what Mojave Water will get to vote on, because they have to decide if they're going to be in on the project or not. And GM McCarthy noted that if the vote goes through, Mojave will have to agree to repay Metropolitan Water about $1 million. However, he posited, he said, if the fix doesn't materialize after being approved, and Mojave puts up that $1 million, will Metro repay Mojave? That hasn't been worked out. And legal counsel Bill Brunig noted in his report that Mojave is included in at least 18 legal challenges to the project by environmental agencies. And then there was something that they had on their agenda, two things that kind of had to do with their strategic financial plan. It's been 10 years since their last plan was updated, and item 11 on the agenda had to do with a budget increase for the consultants to do more work on this. And first they moved item 11, and then they tabled it for 90 days due to last-minute complaints from the Baldy View chapter of the Building Industry Association, the BIA. And this was obviously quite unwelcome to the directors, the staff, the legal counsel, and the plan itself has been through Personnel, Finance, and Security Committee 4 times over the past couple of years, but went before the board earlier this year for that additional time and funding. Gordon Nichols, the Senior Director of Government Affairs for Baldy View, said he hoped to work with Mojave to avoid impact on local development. Council Bill Brunig, he shot right back. He says, you haven't been to any of the public meetings we've been holding on this. And Nichols says, well, I was in one in February. And Brunig says, we've talked about this several times. And Director Mark Page said the same thing. He says, you could have engaged. He said, there's some onus on you. And while BIA is contending that the builders, the brokers, everyone that they represent are concerned about the impact of connection fees proposed in the plan, which was number 12 on the agenda, the plan itself was approved, passed unanimously by the 5 directors that were there. But it was weird because Director Thurston Smith, he seemed to side with the BIA. And he suggested that since the extra funding was tabled for 90 days, well, then we should, table voting on the plan, waiting for that BIA input. That was a no-go. Everybody, Bev, all the directors, they were just like, no. And GM McCarthy says it's a long-term plan for the agency. And he said that the added financing had no impact on the work done so far by the consultants. Mr. Gwar of Raftelis said the connection fees were a separate item. And Kathy Kortner said, we've worked on this for 2 years, and we've feared spending down our reserves with the Department of Water Resources costs our biggest impact. She said, we want a plan of action that is shelf-ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
We had a finance meeting here several weeks ago. I can't remember the exact date. I think it was a very productive meeting. Discussed in some length well 14 and the added costs. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to come forth with some figures that for the public and give an accurate update on that, and an update on exactly what's going on with well 14. Just some side comments, you know, felt condolences to the folks in Vegas and to all the disaster victims. And thanks to our first responders, men and women in uniform. I'd also like to see maybe from council an update on the Coachella water situation.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
I think that'd be very
I
interesting.
can give you a little bit tonight if you
Yeah.
wanted it.
That's all I have.
Thank you. I'm going to stop with Doobie last. Director Hund.
I have nothing to add.
Thank you. Director Flynn.
I might need some technical help on some of this stuff. This JPIA that Susan mentioned is one of those joint powers authority things. I think it's Joint Powers Insurance Authority. And as I understand it, it's something where a bunch of entities or agencies can get together, and as a group, they will insure themselves or invest or whatever the common interest is between the folks. We just ended one with Yucca over something I don't remember anymore. But anyway, it is one of those ways that the district looks for a way to save money on something they have to have. Because all the way up through LAVCO, they've pointed out that we need to protect the assets of the district by having insurance. And these joint powers authority type things allows us to do that. Kathleen, our outreach person, community outreach person, isn't here, so off the top of my head, I can tell you that we're going to have a great shakeout type of thing. If anybody knows more about this, help me. But it's a great shakeout. It's about, I think it's a week from Saturday, and I'm going to man a booth there with Loretta, one of the volunteers, whatever she does. I'm not sure. She might be a docent. But anyway, she frequently inhabits the farmers market and is helpful. Along with that, the farmers market, I tend to attend. I'm not committed to every meeting or every event over there, but I tend to be there for every meeting over there. Al sees me there. He stops by occasionally to chat. I always offer him a chair because I'm always sincerely interested in what he has to say about stuff. Partly it's selfish. He gives me an early warning about what he might talk about here, which I take advantage of. And one of the things that is starting to frustrate me is that I'm not hearing enough from the public about what their opinions and feelings are and reactions to the things that go on. And we are public community representatives up here. We get voted up here. I'm going to run for an election here sometime in the future, I guess, if I don't get fired before then. And I really feel like I need more guidance from the community on these things. So there I am at the farmer's market every time, virtually every time. I was trying to remember a time when I was not there in the last year or two, and I can't remember one. So come by and talk to us and talk to me. Talk to the other directors that are there for at least an hour on Saturdays. And again, I've said it once before, I'll say it again. I'm at the Country Kitchen between 7 and 8 o'clock on Saturdays before the farmer's market. Come on down and sit at my breakfast table and have a cup of coffee, and I might even buy you breakfast, depends on how much money I have in my wallet and if I remember to bring it.
Can't be buying votes here, Tom.
No, well, no. I'll buy almost anybody breakfast. I've done it. Just a side note, I was, the other day, I happened to be driving on Sunburst, because I live up that away. I'm in the north area generally. And I happened to notice the tractor, our big tractor rolling southbound on Sunburst in my rearview mirror, and I was watching, and they plod along. They're not a kind of a licensed vehicle that's supposed to be, they're allowed to be on the road, but they're not going to be driving the 55 that a car may drive on that road. But I noticed that the driver, when he was approached from the rear by two cars, that he safely and moderately pulled over to the side, yielded, and let them pass. And that's not an easy thing to do when you're shifting all of these gears and stuff. But I was just impressed with the courtesy of our, I don't know if it was Kenny or somebody else that was driving the tractor, but I was very impressed with, or at least I noted that he was courteous to the other people on the road driving that big old thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I will say one of the great advantages for JPIA and why it's such an asset for us is because they only insure water districts. And they insure us for things that other agencies would not. And they know, they understand our business and they understand what we need. And it's, plus the rates are really good because it is.
Yeah, I might add to that. You're absolutely right. Joint powers authorities, and in particular ours is a joint powers insurance authority, is all about saving money. And I don't remember the two numbers, but I remember the difference, which is that when we went from private insurance into Aqua JPA, we saved $30,000 a year. So, you know, and the beginning cost was somewhere around 100 or something like that. So, I mean, it was a significant percentage of savings, so really significant. It's all about saving money.
Yeah, it's essentially a whole group of water agencies
Yes. Yeah.
going together
Hundreds,
to collectively negotiate.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's part
Much
of,
more powerful.
part of Aqua now. Okay, I went to the last Mojave meeting, and they are considering water well training and hands-on training for landscapers and homeowners. So far, I think they are going to have a landscaper course down here. We need to find out when so that we can make sure that the people that are doing that as a business understand what the best practices are, because they don't necessarily all know that. They had a resolution for the California water fix. I don't remember whether they did anything with it or not. But they are considering a change in their meeting schedule to move it earlier in the day because so many people have complained about driving at night. As a person who drives 247, I hate that road at night. So they did not make a decision. Mike can't do it because of work, so he would be off the board, and they were concerned that working people would be off the board if it met at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Now, the other thing that was kind of funny, because it's come back to haunt us, we worked with the Koff and Associates on doing a staffing study and all kinds of stuff. And they're working with Mojave, and they had a compensation study on all their staff. And I saw the girl afterwards, and I asked her to give our regards to Gaylord, who we work with, and said that that report comes back to haunt us regularly, which she thought was pretty funny. Now I'm going to be Kathleen, switching hats.
Good.
Her report is, there's a winterizing your pipes class on October 10th from 5:30 to 7:30 at the Yucca Valley Community Center. District water tours, there's still space October 12th, 10 a.m. to 2. Or
8 a.m. to 12.
Oh, 8 a.m. to 2. 8 a.m. to 12. I'm mixing the number. And October 24th from 8 a.m. to 12. So those are the 2 dates that have openings. And call or email Kathleen to get on the list. So that's Kathleen's report. With great thanks to Bev. And the meetings that are coming up, the TAC is, it's tomorrow? TAC is tomorrow. The Technical Advisory Committee is meeting tomorrow in Apple Valley at Mojave. I will be going to that. The Mojave Water Agency Board of Directors meeting on October 12th is Tom. The ASB CSD, that's a special districts dinner. We don't have anyone who's doing that now. If anyone's interested, it's going, they haven't decided the plates yet, but that's going to be on October 16th. Finance Committee is October 30th.
That's the most exciting meeting on the schedule here, I can see.
You know, excuse me while I roll my eyes. Followed by what really is the most exciting meeting, the Water Resources and Operations Committee meeting. And if nobody has anything further, do I have a motion to adjourn?
One more thing,
The next meeting will be at the Helen Gray Center, right?
Oh, that's not on my list.
No, it's not.
Sorry. The
On
next
your
meeting will
Thank you.
be at the Helen Gray Center at 6:30.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so all of you write that down on your calendars.
And we're there because why?
Because this room will have the desks and the files, because we're putting in a new.
Oh, they're putting-
installation
Oh,
of
okay,
files.
okay.
System.
Is that for Kurt to file?
Yeah, you got it.
You're such a smart aleck. Have a motion for adjournment, please. Is
So moved.
there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. We're out of here. Thank you for your patience. Really appreciate it. And thank you for being here, all of you.